All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll get started. So, we'll start by setting our motivation. So, we think that the purpose of this course is to engage in some contemplations on the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment. So then really the purpose of this course is to help us tap into our innate potential for spiritual growth and development, using the Buddha's wisdom to replicate the Buddha's own insights in our own mind, our own continuum. The only thing that separates us from the Buddha is not yet having had those insights ourselves, but the Lamrim demonstrates how to go about that. So we can think that we're here to find those tools, those techniques that will allow us to do that, to really awaken to our full potential. All right. So good evening. So this is a new course, and if it proves useful, we may actually do a Lamrim Year, in the sense that these two, the class, as you have seen, meets twice a week. It's not necessary, of course, to come to all of the classes. The intent is that each month, if you get the Lamrim Year, you'll see that Lama Zopa Rinpoche's advice in there is to spend about a year cycling through the different major topics of the Lamrim. So that's one approach. Once a person does that, maybe once, or I can't say, the best way. Everyone has to determine the best approach, for their own lives, their own mind. But Lama Zopa's advice to us, his general advice, is that it's quite good if we spend 1 month engaging in contemplations on one topic of the Lamrim, and then the next month we switch, and so on. And that therefore you would take about a year to cycle through all of the major topics of the Lamrim, if you do that. So the idea is to strike a balance between the reality that we crave some novelty in our practice. We can't, perhaps in the monasteries, they might take a different approach. They might spend much longer. It could be that for some people, they might stay on a topic until they have an actual realization of that topic. And there's different kinds of realization. The word itself doesn't have only one meaning, but the ultimate meaning would be a direct, non-conceptual realization that depends upon having cultivated single-pointed concentration or calm abiding. So for many, practitioners, again, in monasteries, their first major endeavor is single-pointed concentration, to create that as a tool in their mind that they then can apply to all of the analytical meditations. That takes years for most people. That takes years of retreat. And by retreat, I mean not having a job, not having a family, literally just, 12 hours a day of meditation 7 days a week for years. So single point in concentration, might not be as realistic, at least maybe not right now for most Westerners, and householders and so on. But there are other kinds of realizations of the Lamrim, of analytical meditation, that don't depend on single-pointed concentration and that are nonetheless incredibly impactful and can genuinely reorient a person in an incredibly useful, positive direction. So that could certainly be something that we aim for. Of course, single-pointed concentration is a wonderful goal as well. But we shouldn't feel that all is lost if we decide that maybe it's not likely that we'll develop that. There's lower levels of advanced concentration and that are also helpful. So to whatever degree we can develop calm, focused attention, it's quite helpful in applying that skill toward analytical meditations. But the approach that we will be taking is each month moving to a new topic of the Lamrim. Now, it's entirely up to, so the first class, today's class, will be, again, to talk, just to kind of set out the parameters of the course and to look at the introductory contemplations that actually are in the book but happen before the first major topic. So what we will see, if you happen to look at the book, you'll see that it's quite a long book. It's called Lamrim Year because there's a different contemplation for every single day of the year. Again, broken up into major topics. So with us meeting twice a week, it isn't possible. I mean, it's possible, but we'd have to spend more than a year because we only have 2 days each week if we were to cover every single contemplation. So one option, if you would like, is to engage in the other contemplations on your own on the other days when we're not meeting, to still stick with that topic for that month, but to engage in the other contemplations. And then, maybe to some degree also the ones that we do cover. My intent is to pick, as it mentions in the description, to do my best to pick a representative sample of, great, thank you, Aaron. A representative sample of, because, for example, the first major topic is how to correctly relate to the spiritual guide. And there's, I believe, 59 contemplations. There's different lengths. Not all of the topics have the same number of contemplations. Some have more, some have less. So, and we have, I believe, 8 sessions, 7 or 8 sessions, not counting today, to devote in December to the first major topic. So I can't know in advance necessarily how many contemplations we might do in a class. I think maybe two. Um, if we can do three, then, but so my thinking is to pick about, 14, 15 contemplations out of each topic that sample the sort of subdivisions of the ideas that are presented. Um, that's my approach. That's how it seems like we could do it, and still try to stick with the yearly idea. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, or questions so far? Am I speaking loud enough for everyone, for you guys to? All right, so then what we'll do is we'll look at these introductory contemplations on the Lamrim. For it seems like probably everyone here, there may be some people who look at the recording and maybe come in, a bit later. So to just briefly explain what the Lamrim is, what its purpose is. It is an effort, a later effort, where great masters after the Buddha came along and they looked at the sutra material that we had, that was collected at the time, and their goal, their intent was to try to systematize that material. Because if you can't really see in the video, but we have the Kangir and the Tengir, behind us here, and it's just volumes and volumes of material. So it's not very user friendly. It is not easy to, as a layperson or even as a monastic who, in a monastery whose whole life is study and practice, given the sheer volume of the material and the lack of systemization, what you find if you tried to discern the Buddha's ultimate intent is you find that the Buddha said different things in different sutras to different audiences about the same topic. So which is reasonable, right? If you deeply understand something and then you are meeting with a wide variety of different kinds of audiences and you're trying to express what you understand incredibly deeply, you have to tailor what you're saying to be understood by different audiences. If you are Neil deGrasse Tyson, but you're addressing first graders, you're going to explain astrophysics very, very differently than you would if you were addressing a room full of PhDs. And so if you were to publish the talks that you gave to first graders and the talks that you gave to PhD students or doctors, it would seem like and then someone who doesn't understand astrophysics came along and tried to, it would be really confusing. Like, why was it described this way on this day and this way on that day? If it was, and particularly if this was thousands of years after the teachings had been given and there was just kind of a bare written record that came from hundreds of years of oral tradition. It's incredibly difficult. So we now luckily benefit from this attempt to look at this material and do that systemization, so that we ourselves can easily discern the Buddha's highest intent, his highest, most accurate ways of talking about karma and so on, because these highly realized, incredible masters were the ones that did that work for us. So the other thing that I'll say now is that this course can't really be an attempt to teach the Lamrim. I'm not qualified to teach the Lamrim. There's a basic program course that you can take that teaches the Lamrim. So we will, of course, in the contemplations will address aspects of these major topics. So we'll get a broad overview of the essence of the Lamrim, but it can't really replace the study of, let's say, the middle length Lamrim by Lama Tsongkhapa, or the great treatise on the stages of the path by Lama Tsongkhapa. That is the real way to deeply understand the material. The two, again, they're both written by Lama Tsongkhapa. The great treatise is much larger. The middle length Lamrim is a single volume, whereas the great treatise is 3 volumes. The main difference between the two is the amount of scholarly citation that you find in the great treatise versus the middle length. Some people will say, it's been observed that the section on insight in the middle length Lamrim is particularly impactful. But of course, written by the same person, but written in different times in history. So some people really praise specifically the section on insight in the middle length Lamrim for its clarity and its incisiveness into that topic. But broadly speaking, the main difference between the two is that the great treatise has many more citations, many more other sutras and commentaries that Lama Tsongkhapa is quoting and defending or explaining in greater detail using these quotations. So some people, I've heard it described, that the middle length Lamrim is kind of the meditators Lamrim, and the great treatise is kind of the scholarly Lamrim. I think it's quite, I think everybody at some point tries to read both, tries to some degree study both. I think it's still quite helpful. As I mentioned, these citations, these quotations that Lama Tsongkhapa uses, he still does that in the middle length Lamrim, just not to the same degree. I do think that they're also helpful in meditation. Once you read them, a few times, they'll kind of pop up in your mind when you're on that topic. These kind of so. I wouldn't say that to only do one or exclude one, but that's the difference between them, and we can't replicate that in this course. I described this in the title. I called it discussion and meditation. So in each class we will do a meditation on at least one of the contemplations. Maybe we might do 2 short, it depends. But in my goal, my thinking is that the real value of the Lamrim is experiential, is in oneself engaging with the material, working with the material, doing the meditations. So I hope that we discuss, so it isn't that this is like, as I said, this is not the teaching of the Lamrim. This is discussing how we work with these contemplations. What are our reactions to these contemplations? What doubts arise when we see these contemplations? This is kind of like how to approach thinking about the Lamrim using Lama Zopa's contemplations rather than a scholarly exposition of the Lamrim. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, so in the introductory contemplations, he's talking about the Lamrim, which we've done a bit of. He says, the Lamrim is the main road, the direct highway to enlightenment. And then he says, in the Lamrim, we deal with reality, and reality speaks to us. So these are the first two contemplations, the first two excerpts that he presents us with. And here he talks about antidotes. He talks about the Lamrim being antidotes. And this is really the key to analytical meditation in general, is that every topic of the Lamrim, and as we'll see when we say topic, so for example, as I mentioned, the first major topic of the Lamrim is how to correctly relate to the spiritual guide. And just to get it out of the way, I am not a spiritual guide. I'm not I don't qualify as, so when we discuss that topic, it's talking about someone like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, not just someone who talks about things. So that topic is the first topic of the Lamrim, for many reasons. In the Foundation of All Good Qualities, also by Lama Tsongkhapa, the first verse is that the foundation of all good qualities is the kind and venerable Guru. Correct devotion to him is the root of the path. So, and of course, him here is a historical phrasing, because at that time there just were very few female teachers, which has changed radically over the centuries. So we can easily say correct devotion just to the spiritual guide, to him or her, whomever our spiritual guide is. So this topic is recognizing, and again, we're not really going to get into it today, but to just give an explanation of how the Lamrim serves as antidotes. It is the case that everything that we learn comes from a teacher, whether it's in a book or whether it's alive. It is, I think, true that this topic is emphasizing a personal relationship, with a living teacher, but also we benefit from the teachers that that are no longer living, that we still gain knowledge from. One definition of guru is one who's heavy with realizations, heavy with knowledge, heavy with understanding. And so that kind of interpersonal relationship, which is, which is emphasized for sure, is recognizing that we need to have that relationship be a certain way in order for us to get the most out of it. The purpose of correctly relating to the spiritual guide isn't for the purpose, isn't for the benefit of the spiritual guide. It is for our own benefit. So the understanding is that there are things that we ought to really pay attention to, even if we don't presently have a spiritual guide, because we may at some point. And it's quite useful to go into that understanding how to get the most out of that relationship, how to not squander those interactions, how to really use those interactions to make the most rapid progress toward enlightenment for oneself. Because if we don't understand those things, or if we, it is a difficult topic for the West, the correctly relating to the spiritual guide. But again, that's the purpose of the course. It's not just a pedantic kind of, this is 6 of this and 8 of that, and how, this list and that list. But it's, when we are confronted with this, how do we react? What comes up for us? And then discussing that. When we did that meditation, what happened in the mind? What was it like? What resistance came up for us when we did that? Why was there resistance? So again, I think if you aren't reading the middle length Lamrim or something, I think that's a wonderful way of supplementing. I think there's a new translation, Wisdom Publications, or there's a brand new, just recent translation of the middle length Lamrim that's in print now. Yeah. So what Lama Zopa is saying, and to give another example, the second major topic of the Lamrim is understanding precious human rebirth. And so if we don't understand precious human rebirth, then just like there are all kinds of disadvantages to not understanding how to get the most out of relating to the spiritual guide for our own sake. It is quite common on our planet to look at the billions of people and to just take human life for granted. Even though it's true that among that, the kind of life that we possess is like in the top 1% of, broadly speaking, in terms of ease and comfort, and freedom from disease and difficulty. We've certainly got an incredible comparative opportunity, which is quite easily seen. But we don't tend to really think about that. And we don't tend to put it in an even broader context of other kinds of sentient beings. And, so there's ways of really, really deepening that, so that this incredible appreciation becomes standard, becomes the baseline state that we operate from, which is incredibly useful to have in the mind, so that we naturally turn away from the things that waste this life, from from negativity, from just idleness, from the kinds of meaningless activities that we might otherwise get really caught up in. That, deeply understanding how precious and how rare the kind of life that we have is quite beneficial to overcome that tendency. So all of these topics are doing that. They are recognizing that there are things that many people struggle with that take them away from realizing their potential, tapping into their potential, and presenting them with the antidotes to tamping that down, to overcoming that, so that we stay on track, so that we, are able to get the most out of this life and progress over time, make consistent progress toward that goal, and not get detoured, not get, lost by not understanding what to practice and what to reject, what to adopt and what to discard. Any thoughts or questions? He says, each Lamrim meditation is like a switch. When we have a particular problem, we turn on the relevant switch and there is light. If we have another problem, we turn on a different switch. We push the right button, the Dharma light comes on, and our disaster situation vanishes. So we can kind of, once we get familiar with these, then we know, oh, right now I'm feeling, kind of down, kind of depressed, and then we can raise that up by, again, thinking about how extraordinary our lives actually are, and how there should be no space. Of course, depression can have biological bases and things like that, but if we're just kind of having a rough time in general, then we can begin to see, well, okay, so meditating on impermanence isn't, that's not the solution, but meditating on precious human rebirth might be, that might be the way to counter what's arising. But then in a different situation, we might think we might use the meditation on impermanence because we've recognized that we're starting to get caught up in a lot of kind of non-productive activity. And for that too, it kind of depends. We also have to kind of know our own mind and think, which one is more effective, because we could also use precious human rebirth for that. But you wouldn't use a meditation on patience, for example, if you're trying to overcome um, engaging in a lot of meaningless activity, if you're trying to overcome that, patience is not the right antidote. But recognizing that this life is finite, changing moment by moment, not going to last forever, that can help to overcome that kind of stuck in a rut perspective, as well as could um, realizing that our each moment of this life is like a wish fulfilling jewel if we apply ourselves in the right direction, and if we don't, it's kind of like, having that jewel but not activating it, not tapping into what it can actually accomplish. So that's what he's saying, that we have these different kind of levers that we can pull, different switches that we can to counteract these different states, and how the Lamrim is presenting us with this wealth of strategies, this wealth of specific antidotes to overcome these specific states, negative states, or um, unconstructive states. And then the last thing that he says is he's kind of in a way, Lama Zopa is kind of like the Lamrim Lama. I feel like he really pushes the study of the Lamrim, the practice of the Lamrim. So the third contemplation is dedicating our life to achieving Lamrim realizations is the most important thing we can do. He says going through the main points gives us a wonderful overview of the Buddha's teaching. From it, we can see the full array of subjects dealt with by Buddhism and understand the path that all the Buddhas followed on their way to enlightenment. Also, as we look at the various divisions of the teaching, as shown, we can see that everything that the Buddha taught is in there, everything that we need to receive enlightenment ourselves. So, as I said, the purpose of the Lamrim is to give us a manual for how to become a Buddha. Of course, there's, after that, we have to kind of tack on the Vajrayana contemplations, the Vajrayana kind of practices to, but Lama Tsongkhapa encourages us to become what he calls a suitable vessel for that kind of practice by mastering the Lamrim and really devoting ourselves to that first, so that our mind is really receptive and prepared for practicing the Vajrayana. But there's nothing in the Vajrayana that is different in its meaning or in its essence than what you find in Sutrayana. It's just a different technique. The nature of reality that's talked about in Sutrayana is the same that is talked about in Vajrayana. There are just simply subtler energetic techniques that help a person to focus their mind on that in a more impactful way. But it's not like you get to that and you suddenly realize that, that everything was actually different all along, and that really wasn't what, all of the philosophical understanding that we generate through Sutrayana is unchanged. So he says, the great meditators, the highly realized yogis, all followed outlines in their practice. This was how they attained enlightenment quickly, and this is the great treasure that they passed on to their disciples, people like us. Thus, they have made it easier for us to gain realizations quickly with less hindrance. When we first encounter the Lamrim, neither the teachings themselves nor the outline make much sense. But as we continue to practice analytical meditation on the various topics and gain experience, even just remembering the outline will give us a fantastic feeling. The entire path, everything that the Buddha taught, will come home to us without our having to go through all of the countless words. Just bringing the outline to mind will be such a strong, powerful experience. So here, if you look at the middle, this idea of outline, he's kind of referencing the way that the middle length Lamrim, the way that the great treatise is laid out. You find kind of, I mean, very similar to the way that you would outline any kind of scholarly work. You'll find at the beginning, these headings and subheadings that, and then point by point, these subheadings will be fleshed out with quotations and logic and reasoning and sutra material. And so what he's saying is that eventually we only have to, just like, for example, the foundation of all good qualities is kind of an outline. It's a glance meditation. It doesn't teach you the Lamrim. It doesn't. When I say that the first verse of the foundation of all good qualities is the foundation of all good qualities, as the kind and venerable guru, correct devotion to him is the root of the path. That doesn't teach you anything about what are the ways of correctly devoting in speech, what are the ways of correctly devoting in action, what are the shortcomings of failing to correctly relate. But once a person has done that study, once a person has read these deeper treatises, then even just reciting that verse will bring to mind all of that wisdom, all of that knowledge. And then we combined with meditative skill, and we can kind of enter into a really profound recognition of what we've studied, what we've meditated on, even just using something that briefly outlines the material. Any questions, thoughts? No? All right. Nothing at all that would be helpful to look at or go over?
I guess you guys see it already. I put the links to the outlines in the text.
All right. Well, we may leave it there then for today. We've covered all of the introductory contemplations, and that's before we really get into the first topic on how to correctly. It says guru devotion. There's different ways. In English, we have many different translations for the things that you find in Tibetan that are coming from the Sanskrit. guru devotion is the one that Lama Zopa Rinpoche really, seems to gravitate toward. Um, Correctly relating to the spiritual guide is another one, and I find that maybe Westerners um, find that easier, to work with that kind of phrasing, because when we say devotion in English, it has a very, and how a person interacts with their teacher is a very personal thing, but really, um, it's about relating to the spiritual guide in an appropriate, in the most appropriate way, which is to have great respect and admiration and to be willing, because oneself has chosen. It's not like someone came along and said, "This is your teacher. You must." We ourselves decide who we take as a teacher. And when we do that and under what circumstances. But then once we do that, of course, there is an element of a willingness to be guided, a willingness to be led by that person, to ask their advice on things, to follow through on the advice that they give. So in that way, there is a hierarchy, between the student and disciple, and we're willingly, just like you would apprentice, if you wanted to learn any, you wanted to get good at anything, you might go to a business where there's a great example of someone who can do that, and then it wouldn't make any sense if you argued with that person and you said, well, no, that's not how you bake a cake. That's not how you make, tennis shoes. That's not how you build a car. I'm coming to you to learn that, but I'm going to be disagreeable. I'm going to, not do that. That's not productive. So there's certainly an element of that hierarchy that, that people can find difficult. Um, but but again, so the purpose of this class is to make an effort into thinking about these contemplations and then discussing what comes up, discussing how we react, how it goes, rather than just being like, well, we have to accept, because that's not the Buddhist view. The Buddhist view isn't that we're obligated to just accept what's there. We're interrogating the material. We are working with the material, and only if we continue to find it productive and useful should we continue. And if we don't, then that doesn't mean that we decide instantly that it's useless, but we might start to try to get more information. We might try to think about why it doesn't seem productive. And ultimately, if we decide that as a topic, this isn't something that I'm ready for as part of my practice right now, then that's perfectly valid. And we decide, that we'll revisit it at a later time. So that's, it isn't one size fits all. But the only other thing I would say too is that the Lamrim, to some degree, it's meant for people who are taking things a little bit more seriously. So there is an element of, well, if this is the recipe for enlightenment, then maybe it's all important. Maybe that there's a reason why every single thing is in here. And if I decide to just completely forever and ever omit something, then will I still get the result? Will it still? So we have to think about that too. But that's not to say that if we feel like we're not ready for something, that we can come back to it. Of course, that's always an option that's open to us. We just kind of keep the door open with the understanding that there's probably a really good reason that this is here, and maybe it just needs I need more time to grow into that. Okay. So we will so we'll spend December thinking about how to correctly relate to the spiritual guide. And yeah. Anything that would be helpful before we adjourn? We meet twice a week. So all right. Well, have a great.
If we are reading the Lamrim Year book, do you suggest what chapter pages to look at before Thursday?
I can't answer that question. I mean, if we want to take that approach, then we can take that approach. I don't have pages off the top of my head today, but the middle length Lamrim, to some degree in the Lamrim, they sometimes will talk. Depends on what but there'll be like sections on the greatness of the teaching, the greatness of and then sometimes on meditation. So but basically you would just want to start with where it starts on how to correctly relate to the spiritual guide, because it's going to depend on specifically which of the contemplations are included in terms of page numbers. So I can't answer that question right now, but I would say, just flip to where it starts to talk about correctly relating, and then, you can just start looking at that as a whole, looking at that chapter as a whole for, at least for the next couple of days. All right. Well, and so yes, these are just hour-long classes. So after today, as I said, we will definitely do meditation on the contemplations as well. And if people want to take on the task of meditating on other days, of course, please bring in questions and reactions to how that's going also, but not necessary, not required by any means. Okay, well, great. Have a good night, and I hope to see everybody in a couple days.